good morning, fellow constitutionalists. Today's show is being brought to you by Castos Podcast Hosting. It's a service I use. I switched all my podcasts over to this earlier this year. They do a fantastic job. It's only $15 a month, and they'll host all my podcasts over there. It's a real easy player that they use when it's embedded in your podcast if you have a website like thedanclemenshow.com. So this is an affiliate marketer of mine, so please, if you're looking into getting into podcasting and you want to control your podcast and curate your own, which they make it so easy to do, and their technical help is just superb, try Castos. Go over to thedanclemenshow.com and click on the Castos logo there, and it'll take you over to their website, and they'll get you all set up for what you need to do. Well, again, good morning, fellow constitutionalists. I should say good afternoon, fellow constitutionalists. Welcome to the Free-for-All Friday edition of the Dan Clements Show, a Christian political talk show. I'm your host, Dan Clements, your constitutional warrior fighting for your right just to be an American. It is May 25th in the year of our Lord 2018. Remember, we're a hyphen-free, PC-free zone. God is still in control, and He does love you. And I'm broadcasting live from the Hemlock Studios here in the beautiful central Susquehanna Valley in the great Keystone State. And today's show, we're going to have a really good show today. I have the chat room open. I've used my Sociocaster, which I forgot I've had for a while. I've been so busy trying to do other things or get things done personally in that. I put out notices for the show for the past 2 hours on all my social media. Hopefully we'll have some folks coming over here and jumping into the chat room and getting on with this, because the title of the show is The Biggest Myths About Socialism Aren't Myths. Now, I've seen there's a channel I watch on YouTube called Newsbroke. Very progressive, very liberal, very, pro-socialistic channel. And when I first started watching them a few months back, I thought that they were kind of a tongue-in-cheek type, news organization, but they're not. They are very progressive. They're very liberal, very socialistic, again, in their approach to things. And this video that they put out was about 19 minutes long. Now, I'm not going to play the whole thing for you. Matter of fact, some of the video clips that I do have are going to be, how should I put this? They're going to be cut up. They're going to be edited. And it's one thing, I'm trying to get something done here while I'm doing this with you folks. Let me get over here and get this done. So I'm, let's see. Here it is. All right. I got that set up there. Let me finish up here. Okay. They only put one reference source down in their notes. It's a 7 or 8 page open office writer note, or you would call it Windows. I use open office, so it's a Word document basically, but it's like 7 pages long, very detailed. We're going to go over that. I'm going to take excerpts out of that. I got a PowerPoint presentation set up for definitions of socialism, and I have a PowerPoint presentation set up for this article. And I didn't even go over half their video. I have probably 3 or 4 more videos that I'm going to do, and I'm going to work on them over the weekend and Monday and try to release those out next week, or as I get them done and get them edited, because it's so much. There's so much information to go over. There's so much research that you have to do. There's so much rebuttal that needs to go on to debunk this type of video. And this is something I found pretty common with shows like The Humanist Report, very progressive, very humanistic, Newsbroke, and other leftist YouTube channels. They just will not put their sources. They just won't put their sources in. And if you've ever watched any of my videos, And I say, I got the links down below. You go to the danclemenshow.com, top link in all my videos. You go there, and for the show note, now if you're following the episodes, this is episode 983. You go to the show notes page, or you go to the podcast page, and you scroll down, you'll see all the links that I'm talking about in the show. I haven't left any out. It's just for time sensitive thing, just for space mainly. I link the danclemenshow.com down there so you can go over there and read those links. I give you all the links. These other shows, they do not give you all the links to everything they're talking about in there. And I've had to do some research on my own to actually get the rebuttal done. And this is something I like doing, rebuttal videos. But again, the problem with rebutting the left or rebutting progressives or social democrats is they say so much that isn't so that it takes you forever. It's almost like they do this on purpose, where it slows you down in your research to rebut what they're actually saying. And I think they do this on purpose because they do not want their videos rebutted. They do not want their arguments rebutted. They do not want any of this to happen. So again, we're going to go over this. It's going to be, I don't know how long it's going to take, and the only thing we're talking about today is social, and especially what they call 21st century socialism or democratic socialism. They try to make it sound better than what it is, and they try to make it sound that it's different from when other socialism was implemented. They failed, and they give reasons why. And we're going to go through this in this, especially this article today about why 21st Century Socialism Failed by Eva Mariah. And this was posted back in August 24, 2016. And they're actually, she makes a good argument, but in her making her arguments, she contradicts herself. And she actually gives the reason why things happen the way they happen. And these progressives, they just don't understand. They don't understand the nature of man. They don't understand the nature of governance. No matter who you give the governance to, if you give somebody absolute power, it's going to corrupt them absolutely, because absolute power corrupts. Lord Acton is a favorite saying of his. So without further ado, let's get into the show here, and that way we can get on to the slideshow presentations I have that's going to go on here. I'm going to show the video clip first, and then we're going to start really tearing into it and tearing it apart. Today's, let's get over into this. Today's daily Bible reading is found in the Gospel of John, chapter 4, verses 19 through 24. Now, just to give you a little context, this was the woman that Jesus met at the well, and they had a conversation about, getting the water out, that this was Jacob's well. He told her situation with her husband that wasn't her husband now. And we get into verse 19. The woman said to him, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, and you Jews say that in Jerusalem is the place where one ought to worship." Verse 21, Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. But the hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." Now, these are one of the verses I go to, especially when people talk about supporting Israel and saying that this is prophetic, that about Jerusalem and the moving of naming the United States, naming Jerusalem as the capital, and that, and how they still believe that worship there can be instituted. Well, Jesus came to fulfill the law and to enact a new covenant. If you go back into the book of Hebrews, and I should read some verses out of that in the next couple weeks here. About we had a covenant. It wasn't a perfect covenant because people couldn't adhere to it. So Christ came to, and this was the plan all along to begin with, Christ came to institute a new covenant. So the old law, the old ways of worshiping, the place of worship and everything has all been done away with after Christ's death and the institution of a new covenant, as the Hebrew writer would say. And I just like this verse here in verse 23, but the Lord is coming, and now is when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. Today's quote meal comes from Franciscus de Sales, or Celeste. It is an abuse to confess any kind of sin, mortal or venial, without a will to be delivered from it, since confession was instituted for no other end. Think about that, folks. Think about that one. And today's short Bible lesson comes from Wes McAdams, and it's called Waiting for God to Keep His Promises, What I Noticed When I Read the Minor Prophets. And he does a fantastic job of, oh, sorry, folks, I should have transitioned out of that. Yeah, sorry. I'm doing everything. I still haven't got my new studio set up in here as far as my controls and that. I'm working on that, though. Waiting for God to Keep His Promises, What I Noticed When I Read the Minor Prophets by Wes McAdams over at radicallychristian.com. And this was something, he read all 12 of the minor prophets in one day, which it can easily be done. It takes a few hours, but you can do it. And this is an observation he has here. And if you've ever read the minor prophets, there was always a promise to the remnant. After the captivity, after Jerusalem was destroyed and the children of Israel were taken away in captivity, there was always that promise of restoration. And this is what he noticed when he, waiting for God to keep his promise. So the children of Israel had to wait for God to fulfill his promises to them, that they bring them back to the promised land. So give that a read. Like I said, the links to all the articles will be over at the danclemenshow.com on the show notes page, episode 983. So that's where all the links will be at. And if you're not sure how to get there, in the show notes below the video, the first line there after the introduction and everything, the first one you come to with a URL will be the danclemenshow.com. Now, I have a video I want you to watch. It comes from Newsbroke, and I should get over and do this. I have to get her name, and I thought I wrote it down, and I did not write it down, and I'm going to find it for you, and let me just look this up real quick. Newsbroke. Okay. The funny thing is, let me see here. Oh, her first name's Francesca. So it's Francesca. If that's how you... This lady on here will be... Her name's Francesca and Florinelli. I believe that's Francesca Florinelli over at Newsbroke. So this is the audio for that. Let me get that set up here for you.
Socialism, the monster hiding under America's bed. Our chupacabra, our Candyman. Say it 3 times into a mirror and your kid goes to college for free. Americans are so used to demonizing socialism that most don't really know what it is, or they're shy to admit that they're curious about it. But thanks to a 76-year-old self-described democratic socialist, and now a whole host of candidates running openly as socialists, maybe it's time to understand it. We're looking at some of the biggest myths told about the S word. We've all heard socialism described. Socialism, the monster hiding under America's bed. Our chupacabra, our Candyman. Say it 3 times into a mirror and your kid goes to college for free. Americans are so used to demonizing socialism that most don't really know what it is, or they're shy to admit that they're curious about it. But thanks to a 76-year-old self-described democratic socialist, and now a whole host of candidates running openly as socialists, maybe it's time to understand it. We're looking at some of the biggest myths told about the S word. We've all heard socialism described by the right. You wait in lines for hours, you eat what little nutrients are available, and everyone wears the same thing. Socialism is a favorite straw man of the right, used to disparage any candidate that mentions anything that resembles something like generosity, whether it's Barack Obama or Bernie Sanders. And instead of including socialist voices on television to clarify, they actually have segments like this.
I got to go to the liberal panel. It's got to be tough for you to look at your candidates and see how boring and stiff they are. They're stiffer than you.
Well, they are. Well, thanks a lot. But they did talk about policy, unlike the Republican debates. And it's not socialism. It's capitalism. It's democratic socialism within a capitalist society. You want to talk about giving stuff away?
Yeah.
It's giving stuff. What Republicans do is give stuff to the top 1%. Is Social Security socialism? Medicare socialism?
Yes.
Medicaid socialism?
Yes.
You want to take all that away?
I do. I want to take all of it away.
See
you
how that
stupid
works
panel.
in the campaign.
I want to take it all away. I don't want the government taking my money. I can spend it better than they can, and I can't believe I'm yelling at you again.
Seriously though, there are many different definitions of socialism depending on who you ask. And just because a country has socialist policies doesn't mean it's a socialist country. There are degrees of socialism. So let's just start out with a safe Wikipedia description. Socialism is a range of economic and social systems characterized by social ownership and democratic control of the means of production. That sounds pretty harmless, and yet, of course, that's what a collectively edited, non-profit, free encyclopedia would say, and look how that turned out. Oh, pretty good.
All right, folks, that was Francesca from Newsbroke, and the one thing I want you to notice in all of these, especially when she starts giving definitions, and like I said, we're going to go over this other article here, and I'm going to talk about some more points that are going on here. But one term she uses a lot is generosity. Well, we're being generous to the poor. I have nothing against generosity, but I do not believe it should be on a national basis. I believe generosity should come from the individual because, and I know that they'll try to shame people into this, but what happens? You got some stingy so-and-so out there that doesn't want his tax dollars going to the homeless or, whatever. Doesn't want the government spending his money that way, that he'll take care of himself, that he may give to charities himself. Oh, no, he's not being generous. And you can't do everything by individuals. You got to have government to do this type of work, which is a fallacy. It is a total fallacy, because what did we do before the 20th century socialism here in America? Well, we had fraternal orders like the Grange and the Moose and the Elks. We had communities. We had churches. We didn't have big government involvement in healthcare. So it didn't drive the cost up. It didn't cost people an arm or leg to get health care because of the regulations and the federal government being involved in it and driving up the cost. We didn't have all that in a free market system. And that's what we need to get back to. Now, let's go over here to her definitions. And this is the thumbnail off of the Newsbroke. Off of Newsbroke over there for this. They're the biggest myths about socialism, and I just added on to that aren't myths, and they're going to try to explain that. Now, this is the Wikipedia that she used, and this is where she stopped. Socialism is a range of economic social systems characterized by social ownership and democratic control of the means of production. That's where she stopped, but she needs to read on. And people need to do this also, as well as the political theories and movements associated with them. Social ownership may refer to forms of public, collective, or cooperative ownership, or to citizen ownership of equity. There are many varieties of socialism, and there's no single definition encapsulating all of them. though social ownership is the common element shared by its various forms. Now, this is Wikipedia. Let's get over to the Investopedia. Now, this is an investment site that they try to define terms and everything. And I looked it up in Investopedia and some other sources, and I just, not that I like Investopedia the most, but they had the other definitions that I liked, like free markets and stuff like that we're going to talk about here. Now, Investopedia says socialism is a populist economic and political system based on the public ownership, also known as collective or common ownership of the means of production. Those means include the machinery, tools, and factories used to produce the goods that aim to directly satisfy human needs. In a purely socialistic system, all legal production and distribution decisions are made by the government, and individuals rely on the state for everything from food to health care. The government determines output and pricing levels of these goods and services. Socialists contend that shared ownership of resources and central planning provide a more equal distribution of goods and services and more equitable society. Now, the thing you have to remember with socialists, and I don't care what brand of socialism you have, they always talk about equality in society. Income inequality is a big one for them, that some people earn more than others. They said that shouldn't happen in a society. And guys like me ask, why not? You know, it's common sense. You're going to have people that are more go-getters than the other ones, have more initiative, have more get up and go than other people. And some people are satisfied with the level they're at, and some people aren't. Some people want to reach for more. And if they reach for more, they're going to get more. Not by stealing, but by honest, hard work, by investment, by educating themselves, making themselves more valuable. There's always going to be an inequality of wealth in any system you have. And make no mistake about it, socialism has inequality of wealth in it. There's no doubt in my mind about that. And this is something that they didn't get down to those different definitions, especially in Investopedia. Socialism is a populist economic and political system based on the public ownership of the means of production. Now, we have about 20, I was doing some research earlier this week because I was making some comments on this in her video. I was making some comments and getting in a debate with a gentleman. There's about 2,600 companies in the United States that are employee-owned, either partially or totally. And Publix grocery stores come to mind. I delivered to their warehouses before. You know, nothing wrong with them. They're fine. They're 100% employee-owned. But guess what? The employees don't run the day-to-day operations. They don't make the day-to-day decisions for the company. They hired a CEO and other officers to actually run the company for them. They may own the company, the employees may own it, but they don't technically run it. Now, I guess they can get together and fire the CEO and stuff if they're not doing what they want them to do. But I can bet your bottom dollar that those employees at Public and these other 2,600 companies that are partially or fully employee-owned, they want to make a profit. They want to make a profit off of that. So we have the definition of socialism. Now, I want to share two more definitions with you. One's free markets, and the other one is capitalism. So let me get over here. Now, Wikipedia has a definition for free markets. In economics, a free market is an idealized system in which the price for goods and services are determined by the open market and consumers, in which the laws and forces of supply and demand are free from the intervention by government, price setting, monopoly, or other authority. Proponents of the concept of free market contrast it with the regulated market in which a government intervenes in supply and demand through various methods, such as tariffs, used to restrict trade and protect the economy. In an idealized free market economy, prices for goods and services are set freely by the forces of supply and demand and are allowed to reach their point of equilibrium without intervention by the government. Now, in other videos that I'm going to share and talk about, she's going to talk about the invisible hand. And she'll talk about having democratic controls in the economy. Well, in a free market And even in a capitalistic, true capitalistic, not crony capitalism, but in a free market capitalistic system or capitalism system, the invisible hand is the regulator, is the democracy, people spending their money, making decisions, is the democracy in the markets. But they don't, no, it can't be. That's too simplistic. That would never happen. That could never happen. And I'm going to show you, I'm going to prove to you, maybe not in this video, but the other videos I'm going to have, and I'll link to them as I get them posted up. I'm going to prove to you that even though in Venezuela is the country I'm going to use as my example, that even though the whole market is government controlled, the whole means of production is government controlled, there's still a black market. And the prices are set in that black market by supply and demand. And whoever's willing to pay some people, they might say, well, I'm going to sell this to you for $50 a pound, whatever that pound is, whatever the commodity is. Someone else might come in and say, look, I'll give you $75 a pound for that for all the pounds you can get me. And so somebody just came in, some competition came in and actually jacked the price up. So now if no one's willing to pay $50 a pound, then they would have to drop, if they want to get rid of the product, they'd have to drop their prices down. But even in the most communistic, socialistic societies, black markets existed, and a black market is in essence a free market without government control. Now, government tries to shut them down and tries to catch them and stuff like that, but it's still a type of free market. Now, Investopedia says the free market is an economic system based on supply and demand with little or no government control. It is a summary description of all voluntary exchanges that take place in a given economic environment. Free markets are characterized by a spontaneous and decentralized order of arrangements through which individuals make economic decisions. Based on its political and legal rules, a country's free market economy may range between very large or entirely black market. Now, Wikipedia's definition for capitalism is an economic system based upon private ownership of the means of production and their operation for profit. Characteristics central to capitalism include private property, capital accumulation, wage labor, voluntary exchange, a price system, and competitive markets. In a capitalist market economy, decision-making and investments are determined by every owner of wealth, property, or production ability in financial and capital markets, whereas prices and the distribution of goods and services are mainly determined by competition in goods and service markets. Real close to a free market. And that's why frequently I'll call it free market capitalism, as a lot of other folks do. I'm not the only one that does this. Now, the final definition we'll get into is capitalism is an economic system in which capital goods are owned by private individuals or businesses. The production of goods and services is based on supply and demand in the general market or the market economy rather than through central planning, planned economy, or command economy. Democratic socialism, folks. The purest form of capitalism is free market or laissez-faire capitalism, in which private individuals are completely unrestrained in determining where to invest, what to produce or sell, and at what prices to exchange goods and services, operating without checks and controls. Most modern countries practice a mixed capitalist system of some sort that includes government regulation of business and industry. And right now, in our country, we have a mixed market system. And what do I mean by a mixed market system? Well, it's not basically, hang on a second, I got to minimize something here. It popped up. It should have popped up. It is based on a mixed market, like Alan Combs in that clip. He was the unanimated object. That was Alan Combs of Hannity and Combs, if you remember back that far. Very progressive man. He said we have social democracy inside of a capitalist system. And the problem I see with that is any time, the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. When that was originally instituted, it had a mandate on it. In order for that to work, you had to mandate that every citizen be a part of it, whether you agreed with it or not, whether you needed it or not. You had to be a part of it. And there was penalties for not being a part of it. Same way with Social Security. Same way with Medicare and Medicaid. Social Security, you don't have a choice. It gets taken out of your paycheck. Period. There's no question about it. And the problem with that, again, there's no way to opt out of that. If you wanted to opt out and take care of your own retirement, take care of your own medical, in the United States, we used to have things, and you can still get them, but they're very costly, medical savings accounts. And the reason why they're so costly is because Congress years ago restricted how many of them could be out there. Now, in my opinion, medical savings accounts would be the best free market solution for paying for individual health care. You get rid of the employers having to have the medical insurance. So you get rid of that whole deduction for the employers and everything, and it would just be a straightforward, you have your medical savings account that goes with you from job to job, and the employer offers, to put so much a pay period in to that, and you can elect to put so much a pay period into that to pay for your basic medical needs. And a lot of times what some people have done is they've actually used some of the money out of the medical savings account to pay for a catastrophic plan. So anything over a certain dollar amount, this plan would kick in so they wouldn't go broke. And to me, that would be a free market solution to the Affordable Care Act. But again, if you take the government out of control and you allow the citizens to operate in a free market, then they're going to have a whole bureaucracy they need to get rid of. And trust me when I tell you, I don't care if it's a Republican or Democrat, they are loath to get rid of bureaucracy. Because they think when they get in power, depending on who you talk to, Republican or Democrat, they can use that bureaucracy to implement their plans or their ideas. And that has, to me, that has always been a bad idea. So we have the definitions of socialism, and we have the definitions of free markets and capitalism. Now, what they're talking about, especially Francesca, was 21st century or democratic socialism. We voted in. Well, the problem with democratic socialism is you get 51% of the people telling the other 49% what they can or can't do. Now, that's democratic? Absolutely. But again, in democratic socialism, there is no opt-out. One thing is happening on Capitol Hill right now, and I haven't seen any news update on that. The court, and we may not hear for a month or two, the court was supposed to decide on, it was about unions, whether someone who, they had to be a part of the union, that they had to pay dues into the union. Or, they could not automatically have their dues taken out, stuff like that. Or people could work for a company and not have to be part of the union. Well, the unions, they can't have that. If they have a company unionized and there's people working there that aren't part of the union but still their labor, they're looked at as freeloaders. And a whole lot of trouble comes along with that. But it's looking like, court watchers have said the court may come down on the side of the individual saying, this is wrong, that a union can force somebody to pay dues and be part of the union just to work at a certain place. So I don't know how that's all going to flush out, and I don't know how that's all going to look like in the future, but that's just one example. And the one thing, and we're going to get into this article here real quick, talking about why 21st century socialism failed. They're always going to try to blame it on, well, we didn't really get the capitalist out of there. There were still too many capitalists operating in there, or people operating on the capitalist idea, or in the case of Venezuela, They said that the laborers, the workers, didn't have total control of the system. Therefore, that's why it failed. And they said, and the other thing that really bothered me in this article and in the subsequent videos I'm going to put out about this, was they said, well, this hasn't really been tried where the workers actually take over the means of production. I'm like, that's a bunch of garbage. The Bolsheviks might have to differ with you on that. The revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, it was the workers that rose up and took out the Tsar and took over the means of production. But then guess what? They couldn't run them. They couldn't run them by themselves, so someone had to step in. Someone had to step in and do it for them. And then once those people, the Leninites, stepped in, one of the first things they did was disarm everybody, because they knew if they implemented, went down the logical progression and path of socialism, that the workers would revolt again. So the first thing they did was get rid of the guns. And again, we all live, for better or for worse, we all live in a political world. We all live in societies that have been politicized. And so the idea that you're going to set up democratic socialism in a country where it's going to be from the bottom up is ridiculous. Now, you've heard me preach, don't say I'm hypocritical, but you've heard me preach on this show here about being a sovereign individual, and we're sovereign over the state as individuals. Yeah, that's still the case, but the problem, not the problem with it, but the thing about that is, as a sovereign individual, I cannot force another sovereign individual to go along with what I want done. That's why we have debates. That's why we put our ideas out in the marketplace of ideas and put it out, civil public discourse, and we let our ideas get aired out and make the best arguments we can to support those ideas, and then let everybody else decide. But the thing that has to be done, and this is why I'm doing this video, and a couple other videos to rebut this whole video, is it has to use facts. It has to use truth. You cannot, like that young lady did, you cannot go up there and stop the definition, even a Wikipedia definition, in the middle of a sentence. Socialism is a range of economic and social systems characterized by social ownership and democratic control of the means of production. That's where they stopped. And the sentence actually goes on, as well as the political theories and movements associated with them. Now, what do socialists think are going to happen if you give all the power to the people, all the power to the workers? Somebody's going to emerge out of there as leaders, because other people aren't going to want to do it. They're going to want people to lead them. And that's human nature, folks. There are followers and there's leaders. There's sheeple and there's wolves. And I don't care how idealistic they get, or how many different terms they use for it. Democratic socialism is the newest term. You're still going to have your leaders. And I don't know where Bernie Sanders' followers' heads are at, but he is part of the 1% that he rails so much against. He is part of the 1% that he rails so much against. And throughout history, those that control the levers of power in a socialistic system are the richest ones. They benefit the most. And I don't understand why they can't get that through their heads about that these leaders are going to be benign. These leaders are going to be benefactors, and they're going to be benevolent to them. And Venezuela is a good story that shows that isn't the case. That's not the case at all. Okay. Why 21st Century Socialism Failed by Eva Mariah. And this is about 15 to 17 slides, something like that. So it's not the whole article, but I just took the highlights out. It is heavily edited because I did take the highlights out of it. And this is posted on August 24th in 2016 over at jacobinmag.com, the very progressive liberal magazine over there. And their writers seem to be the same way. And because of where they put the blame on everything. But now the pink tide governments, including those like Venezuela, with a more radical vision of social transformation, are receding. The commodities boom is over, and with it, a major economic crisis has challenged the entire project. What they're talking about is Venezuela, before Hugo Chavez came on, became very rich because of the oil. And it seemed to me that the society was geared around all that oil instead of producing other things that may not rival the income of oil, but in case something happened to the oil, that they had other goods and services that they could sell in the economy to keep the economy going. Okay, so they were like a one-horse race here in Venezuela years ago before Hugo Chavez. Serious questions confront us. Do these setbacks mean an end to the region's left turn? What is at stake in Venezuela? What role has the United States played in all this? What about China? And most importantly, does this political and economic crisis mean that socialism of the 21st century has failed? They asked the question, and then Eva goes on and tries to answer that question and tries to keep it going. And like I said, the biggest problem with that is where she lays the blame. And it was just in the news this morning as I was getting onto the show. There was real quick, there was an active shooter. I'm not going to really get into that. 2 people were hurt. The shooter's in custody out in Noblesville, Indiana, out around Indianapolis. But just after that story, they were talking about Argentina and how Argentina is starting to go the way as Venezuela. They're devaluing their currency. They need to borrow billions of dollars to get through the end of 2019, the president's end of his term, and commodity prices are starting to creep up, and so they're looking like they may go back to what happened in the early 2000s down in Argentina. And the other, Brazil's another one that's going the same way. Now they're trying to blame this on capitalists. They're trying to blame this on the International Monetary Fund, which I don't agree with, but especially they're trying to blame it on America. But the one thing Eva never brings out in this, that she talks about it in passing, was how Hugo Chavez in Venezuela stole the oil infrastructure from the companies that actually owned it. They nationalized all the oil. Exxon was a big player down there. And when they nationalized the rigs and they nationalized the infrastructure, Exxon lost a bunch. I mean, we're talking billions of dollars that was literally stole from them. And as we go through the article, they're going to explain a couple more things about how, well, if they didn't think a business was going the way it should go, that they would just nationalize it and take care of it from there. Okay. By looking closely at Chavez Venezuela, the most influential pink tide nation, we can come to some more general conclusions about the region's attempt to overcome the challenges of the neoliberal period. Now, neoliberal, if you just take that word out and put libertarian in there, that would be a better fit. I don't know why they got to use these big fancy words instead of using the vernacular of the day. The challenges, a careful assessment of the Bolivarian revolution reveals that Chavez socialism only ever manifested itself rhetorically. Real gains like income redistribution proved compatible with the global capitalist order. But he was using Hugo Chavez. What Hugo Chavez did had nothing to do with free markets or capitalism. Not one damn thing. Everything that he did was socialistic in nature, where they nationalized everything. And under his regime, he was putting people, his buddies, cronyism, in place of some of these manufacturers that he deemed either was opposing him or that were misusing whatever resources they had, so they wanted to put the people in charge of it. Okay? Now, we're talking about 2016, folks. In late June, the New York Times put out an article saying Venezuela's economic crisis, triggered by a drop in oil prices after a decade of excessive government spending, borrowing, and corruption, has led to a shortage of medicine, food, and other goods. Meanwhile, President Nicolas Maduro, who has militarized cities in response to the crisis, is fighting to push for a recall referendum. Now, this was clear back in 2016. And if you don't know the brief history between then and now, the opposition got more seats on the council than Maduro's people, but then he just dismissed them and set up his constituent council with cronies and supporters of him, and pretty much rewrote the Constitution without a by your leave by the people. So Hugo Chavez was a dictator. Nicolas Maduro was a dictator. I'm sorry, and this will come out in another video. Every time socialism is put in place, now I wouldn't say every time, the vast majority of times that socialism is put in place, it becomes a dictatorship, or it's a colonialism. They try the video tries to, and I said this is going to be in future videos here. I'll get out this next week. They try to claim that colonialism is capitalism. It was not. It was socialism. It was socialism. The UK, the British Empire, owned the means of production, controlled the people. Not to the point that they were slaves, but the British Empire pretty much controlled everything. The means of production, the sale, and everything. And they're pretty much raping these countries economically. That has nothing to do with capitalism. Mercantilism is closer to capitalism than colonialism, but even mercantilism isn't really capitalism. So they're through this article and through the subsequent videos, and I'll make mention of this, we're going to find out that what they call socialism, or what they think socialism is, or how it should be implemented, never can happen, and never has happened, and never will happen. Because the main thing is they have to use force to get it implemented. If somebody or some buddies don't want what or like what's going on and want to opt out of it or want to oppose it, then the socialists get their noses bent out of shape and they use force to bring people in line. That happens every single time. Even in our democratic socialism, as Alan Combs says, with the ACA, force was threatened if you didn't become, an adherent to or buy the policies that were in ACA, or if you didn't have an insurance policy through where you worked. Because they find you through the IRS. What happens if you didn't pay that fine? Well, the IRS they have armed agents with a lot of bullets. So there's that threat of force if you do not comply. It's almost like the board. Resistance is futile. All right. A small step from disaster in Venezuela, the editorial board writes. Citizens of the country with the world's biggest oil reserves are rioting for food and dying for want of basic medicines. Meanwhile, President Nicolas Maduro is doing all he can to neuter the opposition in the legislature that wants to recall him from office. Public frustration threatens to metastasize into violent unrest with repercussions for neighbors near and far. And we're seeing that today. We are seeing that in the streets today. They just had an election. Maduro won another 6 years, and it was mainly because none of the opposition even came out to vote because they were protesting the vote. And there's a lot more of them than there were Maduro supporters. So there's huge unrest in the country. And it doesn't matter how many of these socialists get involved down there and want to devolve power to the local level, it never happens. It never, ever happens because people, not all, but some people out there are going to revert to their worst natures, and they're going to be thieving, there's going to be corruption, and they're going to hoard for themselves, give to their best friends, and everybody else can just take a long walk off a short pier as far as they're concerned. Like I said, these are just excerpts out of this whole article. I encourage you to go read the article. Again, it's over at thedanclementshow.com. It'll be in the show notes page for episode 983. But why can't the government resolve the crisis? Is it only because of the drop in oil prices? Is it because of the economic war? Is it because, like the U.S. media says, socialism has failed yet again? Yes, 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 and yes. Socialism has failed. Socialism, every time it's tried, has failed. I don't care. You try to put a new spin on it. You try to make it look better than what it is. It never is. Because, again, the one thing that they fail to talk about is how they need to force you to comply with their demands of democratic socialism. Well, we want to give everybody free health care. Well, I don't want to support that. Well, tough. We're going to use the IRS or some other government agency to make that happen. Okay? That's what we're going to do. All right, folks. Let me go to the next one here. So yes, it has failed. Chavez entered the political arena to oppose hated neoliberal policies. He was a military officer of indigenous background, raised by a single mother in rural Barinas. In 1992, a small dissident military group called the Revolutionary Bolivarian Movement 200, MBR 200, led by Chavez and 3 others, staged a coup against President Carlos Andres Perez, claiming the cause of the poor Venezuelans. The coup failed, and Chavez went to prison, but from then on, he was known as a hero fighting against a broken system. And some people believe that this was a setup by Chavez. He knew he couldn't win. He knew he wasn't going to, well, he had a pretty good reasoning in his mind that they were going to kill him. They're just going to jail him for this attempted coup. And I remember that attempted coup. He called this process of socializing Venezuela the 5 motors of socialism for Venezuela, which is set apart from the revolutionary socialist tradition of taking state power through a workers' revolution. According to Chavez, the most important motor, and like I said, go to the article and you'll read up ahead what this motor was. It was just like 5 pillars of this socialism. The most important motor, and the one that is still being discussed today, was number 5, the explosion of communal power, the last step towards socialism, which communal councils that self-manage their communities eventually replace the capitalist state. And all the other 4 steps that lead up to this amount to the same thing. You got to take over the means of production. You got to put people in charge of that production, to the workers. Power to the people, power to the workers, and you have to put them in power. And then finally, to consolidate the power, the 5th one was this communal power, to put these communal councils in charge of the communities. And China still has something like this today. I have friends that were missionaries over in China, and they described the government, and there was always a government official with his, council or whatever, that sort of ruled with an iron fist over the community because they're afraid of the Chinese government coming in and taking away what they had. All right. According to Chavez and his Marxist mentor, Esteban Meseros, author of the renowned book Beyond Capital, and the reason why I put this in red is this is key, folks. The key to a successful 21st century socialist revolution is that it does not entail one class imposing on another, but instead requires socialists to win over the social majority by showing how their system works in daily practice. And again, he actually puts in, I think unbeknownst to himself, I think he's a little too smart by half, he puts in the main problem with the whole socialist scheme, the whole democratic socialist scheme that everybody wants to happen in Venezuela and wants to take place. He's talking about requiring socialists to win over the social majority by showing how their system works in daily practice. Now he's talking about the majority. He doesn't talk about those that don't want this. And there's the downfall of the system. You have to force people to do this. In a free market capitalist system, if you don't want to work with a corporation, you don't have to. I've said before on the show, I will not work with Chevy and I will not work with Chrysler. I have many other choices. I got Ford, Nissan, Toyota, Honda, Volkswagen, BMW, Mercedes. I got all these other companies that I can go to and get vehicles that I want when I want them. And they can't force me to buy GM. They can't force me to buy Chrysler. That's a free market system. I have that choice. Now, people, they have a backwards idea of capitalism. They have a backward idea of freedom. And we'll talk about that in some of the videos that are going to come along here in a little bit. But again, he's talking about the majority by showing how their system works in daily practice. That system works for a little while because mainly, and this is what they kept talking about with Urban Meyer in Ohio State. When he came in at Ohio State, he was working off another coach's recruiting, and he won national title because of that. That's what a lot of people were saying. But he proved them wrong. Urban Meyer's a good recruiter, and Ohio State, they have a down year or two every now and then, because they're rebuilding the whole team. But for the most part, they're usually up there in the hunt for the Big Ten championship and also the national title. So what they talk about here is there's still a lot of capitalists, and they'll see this in this whole article. Oh, there's a lot of capitalists still out there, and you got to overcome that capitalism. You got to overcome that ideology. And there's a lot of people in Venezuela, I bet, that like free market capitalism, that like the idea that we set our own prices, keep the government out of the way, just have the government protect us and enforce contracts. Simple as that. It's really just as simple as that. Okay. Let's go to the next slide here. Community councils were formed. Some unproductive companies were nationalized and made into cooperatives. The National Union of Workers replaced the right-wing control labor union that had participated in the failed coup. And the social mission to extend health care services and education to the barrios reached their peak of efficiency. Now, they do claim in some of these other videos coming up, where, well, as a matter of fact, I have a slide in here on this, where they claim about, how many people are covered with health care and the literacy and stuff like that, and how many people are living below the poverty level, how little people are living below the poverty level, and so on. This process greatly, we're talking about these community councils, greatly elevated the popular classes' quality of life, arguably above most of Chavez's allies like Brazil or Argentina, as Les Suster writes. These gains include a reduction of poverty from 55% of the population to 34% of the population. Now, they're talking about this back in 2007. This is when Suster was talking about, right? The achievement of literacy for 1.5 million adults, the virtual elimination of hunger through subsidized grocery stores that service 13 million people, medical care provided by Cuban doctors via free clinics in slums, reaching 18 million people, nearly 70% of the population, access to the higher education for the poor and working class, and special affirmative action programs for indigenous people. Now, this was back in 2007. And I have an article here that talks a little bit about this. We're gonna break away from this real quick. In Venezuela, 82% of poverty. Where's our friends now? And this is by Ronaldo Trombetta, and he goes through. It's from The Guardian. He talks about how today. This was. Let me see here. Let me get my notes out here real quick. That was written back in April 5th, 2017, just a little over a year ago. So now Venezuela is back up to 82% of people live in poverty. And you can't blame it on capitalism. You just can't blame it on capitalism. Because capitalism had nothing to do with this. Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro, they're not capitalists. They're dictators. They're socialistic dictators. And they saw this socialism as a way or a vehicle to gain power. And that's exactly what socialism, except for, like, again, The UK didn't go that far. The UK did not go that far. But it leans towards authoritarianism. Now, a lot of people, I spent a little over 2 years in Scotland, in the UK, and you talk about an authoritarian government. You know, if you had a TV with an antenna, you had to have a license to be watching that TV, and they had these vehicles going around that told them that this house or this apartment, this floor was picking up TV signals, and they would check the address to see if you had a license. If you didn't, you got a fine, and sometimes they'd confiscate your TV and your antenna. Now, if that's not authoritarian, I don't know what is. But back in 2007, they were down to 34% reduction in poverty. You know, down to 34% of the people were living below the poverty level. Now that's back up to 82%. Why is that? Why is that back up to 82%? Because of the socialistic things that were going on. The policies are implemented. The taking over of nationalizing. If you go back a slide real quick here. Let's see if I can go back a slide here. Something's not working right here. All right, let's see if I can go back now. Community councils were formed, some unproductive companies were nationalized and made into cooperatives. The National Union, and just the first one, the councils were formed and some unproductive companies were nationalized. Who determined that they were unproductive? Well, it was the government, and it might have been the community councils because maybe they were greedy. I like, and this is something that's going to come up in the videos in the future here. When Phil Donahue, I think it was in 1979, Phil Donahue interviewed Milton Friedman, and Milton Friedman was taking that boy to the woodshed about capitalism and socialism and stuff like that. Just Phil Donahue just couldn't believe what he was hearing, and Milton Friedman's one of my heroes, one of my economic heroes, and I think he's got it right. And I'm gonna show you this because news broke on this the biggest myth of socialism brings him up, and again they cut the clip out. And someone accused me of this clip I used today. Oh, you edited a lot out. Yeah, I edited a lot out just for time, but I got the main content in, and I'll have the links in. It's one of the first ones on there. The biggest myths about socialism. News broke YouTube video. That's right at the top of my links. You can go watch the video and see what I took out. I don't hide anything on here, unlike my Democratic Socialist friends over at Newsbroke. This period, we're talking about this 10-year period between 2003 or 1997 to 2007, something like this, 10 years, this decade. This period came to be known as the Golden Decade among other things that allowed the pink tide governments, Venezuela, Brazil, Uruguay, Ecuador, Argentina, to carry out in varying degrees populist social measures while avoiding a direct confrontation with the bourgeoisie. Talking about the people that used to own the capital, used to own the businesses. Okay? This is important to understand here. Growth could minimize tensions and pacify conflict between the social sectors, granting these governments the stability needed to pass progressive measures. Basically, what they were doing, they were lying to the people. It was an artificial inflation of the economy, saying, look how good we're doing, because they grabbed up all the resources and they were redistributing resources, but not as far as the social democrats of the 21st century wanted them to go. Growth could minimize the tensions and pacify conflict between the social sectors. Because some sectors are going to be producing more money than the other sectors, and other sectors are going to be losing money by the very fact they don't know what they're doing when they're trying to run these businesses. The people don't know what they're doing. And the government doesn't know what they're doing. Granting these governments the stability needed to pass progressive measures. That's their goal, to pass these progressive measures, folks. It's no more complicated than that. It really isn't. Commodity prices hit a 12-year low this year, as of 2016, which goes a long way to explain why export-dependent Latin American commodities have seen their GDP growth slow, falling from an average of 4 to 6% between 2003 and 2013, and that's the golden decade they're talking about, to 1.2% in 2014 and even lower in 2015. The golden decade of strong economic growth seems to have ended. And again, it was only artificially propped up because of oil prices. Because of oil prices. There's no other reason for it. There's no other explanation for why they were growing. It was because of the oil boom. They were selling oil hand over fist, and the country was making a lot of money. But again, the government saw all this money, and they were blinded by the oil money that came in. It blinded them to everything else that was going on. In Venezuela, Chavez and his allies developed a new socialist theory that inspired millions of people to believe that the new road towards socialist revolution was open. But today, in crisis and disarray, the country could not look less like a socialist society. Folks, this is exactly, Venezuela is exactly what happens in a socialist society. That's the funny thing about this whole thing. That's the funniest thing about this whole thing, that it does look like a socialist society. This is exactly what they look like when they start to fail. And you cannot blame capitalism on them. You can try. You can try to blame capitalism on them, but in the end, you're just not going to do it. And it's funny to me how these people can sit there with a straight face and claim that it's capitalism that's actually doing the harm. That these people are still, there's capitalists in there. It's got to be. It's not socialism. Democratic socialism works. It's got to be these pesky capitalists that do not want socialism to succeed. And as far as I'm concerned, I think that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing that they don't want this, these capitalists don't want this socialist ideologies to succeed, because every time it succeeds, it fails. And when it fails miserably. It fails miserably. And the results are starvation, no goods or services to be had, and even if you could have them, you couldn't afford them because of the devaluation of the bolivar. Right now, I believe that the last estimate I've seen, the inflation rate's like 657%, something like that. And it takes 10 bolivars to buy $1. And that's even on the low side. And the only reason why they're talking about that is because of the black market and everything. But let's get on and try to finish these up. I know it's already 10 after the hour. But let's try to get these finished up here. The party formalized the bureaucratic layer of normal Chavistas who were put in charge of different state sectors. In no time, this new caste engaged in corrupt behavior while continuing to deploy socialistic rhetoric. The government's idea of funding and supporting popular power didn't work in practice. And that's because of the corruption. A natural leader, whether he's good, bad, or different, is going to come about. Is going to come about out of these systems, because there's sheeples and there's wolves. And these wolves are always going to come to the forefront. I don't care if you try to empower every person on the bottom, there are going to be people down there that just do not want to lead, period. That's human nature. And you can't go against human nature. So I don't care how pure your intentions are, you want to start this from the bottom up and socialism is about control. even if they call it democratic socialism, because they're talking about voting. They're talking about voting somebody's property away or someone's rights away. In a democracy, you got two bullies and a kid, and the two bullies are voting on beating up the kid. The kid has no choice in it because he got outvoted. We're going to beat you up. Let's have a vote 2-1. Okay, we're beating you up. In a republic, that wouldn't happen because they'd have representatives there. The two just couldn't vote and say, hey, we're going to beat this kid up. They have to use their representatives, and the representatives have to debate to see if that's a proper thing to do or not. And I know that's a simplistic story, but that's one of the reasons why the founders they abhorred democracy. And see, progressives and socialists, that's the only way they can operate. If they can gain 51% of the population, they got it. And that 51% can push around the other 49%. That's why Ben, and as far as I'm concerned, should never be a democracy. It's always been a constitutional representative republic. With Maduro's government, the bureaucrat layer seems to have consolidated even more power through clientistic relationships to some of the very social programs that were designed to build power from below. Again, these sheeple are allowing themselves to be taken advantage of. It's not as capitalism has nothing to do with this. This is the natural progression of socialism. Plain and simple. No matter how you try to implement it, no matter how pure your intentions are. Contrary to what the corporate media, now this is Eva, this is this lady talking about this. Contrary to what the corporate media says, however, socialism did not cause this crisis, but the opposite. Which, again, they have to really do some somersaults and gymnastics with the truth here. The popular measures enacted during the most prosperous years of the revolution were never socialist, but rather attempts to fix capitalism and avoid a full confrontation with the ruling class. Again, it is socialism. Capitalism had nothing to do with this. What did they do? Chavez and his cronies nationalized the oil companies. They nationalized other businesses. They put communal councils in charge of mismanaged businesses or underperforming businesses and gave them to the workers. That's socialism. It's nothing to do with free market capitalism whatsoever. Now, to be sure, there's people in the country that believe in free market economies and that were fighting against this. They didn't get very far. So again, you cannot blame this. Socialism is the only cause here. The dual fixed exchange rate. Now, this was idiotic to begin with. She'll explain this. The dual fixed exchange rate meant to subsidize food production and distribution in the country demonstrates this. To make food accessible to all, the Minister of Economy drafted a plan to provide preferential dollars to businesses that imported these essential goods and sold them at a subsidized rate in the supermarkets. Now, what happened? Now, they're talking about selling at a subsidized rate. If what you're doing to the economy is devaluing your money, the bolivar, then does the person importing this stuff that has to, like let's say I was an importer of food into Venezuela, I'd have to foot the bill to begin with and hope I get subsidy monies back from the country. And maybe in the beginning they did, but once the money ran out or once the value of the bolivar hit such a rock bottom place or price, what assurances were these importers going to get that they were going to be paid for the goods they were bringing in, because they had to sell them. They had to sell them at the subsidized rate in the supermarkets. Again, that's Socialism 101. The way they were doing that. Nothing to do with capitalism, nothing to do with free markets. Right in her article, she tries to blame something else when in actuality it was socialism and the socialistic policies that created the problems. From the beginning, long established local capitalists worked with the new bureaucracy to take advantage of the system. Some outright stole the money, never importing the goods they declared. Others did import promised goods, but then smuggled them through Colombia to get a better price or sold them directly on the black market where the gains were much higher. What happens if the government controls the whole economy, devalues the money, black markets pop up? Black markets pop up. People that have the money they're willing to pay will pay. And yeah, were some of these local capitalists? You betcha. Because these capitalists knew what was going on. And I bet you if you go back, the money that was being stole were by folks on the communal council or the communal council itself that was controlling all this. The central government had to have somebody there to put this money through, okay? And so the black market popped up, which is always what happens when you have a bad economy or when you prohibit things. Prohibition, black market and booze. Socialism, black market and everything, because you don't have anything, because your policies fail, because you don't understand price structures, you don't understand competition, you don't understand markets. You don't understand how people work and act in markets. You think everybody should just follow a certain prescription, a socialist, democratic socialist prescription, the workers take over the means of production, and everything's going to be hunky-dory. And if there's no competition, which Chavez and Maduro seem fit to actually eliminate competition, then there's no incentive. There's no incentive for these businesses to actually produce and actually be profitable and service the people. Now, this profit-seeking logic is how every capitalist system operates. Now, she's talking about the black markets, and she's talking about actual price. You know, these black markets, they sell at the prices they can get, and if people are willing to pay for it and they have the cash to pay for it, those people get it. Now, in Milton Friedman and Phil Donahue, they kept calling this greed. And there's different definitions to greed. One definition is a self-interest. I'm a husband and I'm a family man. I have children. I have people that depend on me. So my self-interest is if I have a product that you want to buy or exchange for another product of equal value that I want, we're going to do an exchange. Most of the exchanges in the United States happen with money. I have a job. I earn money. I use that money to pay a loan on my house, to buy groceries, and basically operate in a free market, because that's exactly what I'm doing. I have choices. I have so many choices for grocery stores, so many thousands, tens of thousands of items, different items in that grocery store, so many choices of each item in the grocery store. I have multiple places I can buy my fuel for my vehicles at. I have multiple places I can buy my vehicles at. I have multiple places I can take them to get them fixed. I have multiple places to get tires. I can drive on different roads that I want to drive on. And I got so many choices, they're hard to even categorize. But in a socialist society, you don't have that because they don't know what they're doing. Socialists do not know how to run businesses, period. It's just that simple. So, but this case is especially galling because one of the ones in charge of funding the socialism of the 21st century were the ones actively engaging in price gouging. We're talking about the corruption that inevitably develops in a socialist society because you have government as the ultimate authority. They're the ones wielding the power and the force. So if people start pointing out, hey, this person's corrupt, he's pocketing money, whatever, what's the next step? Well, that corrupt government official is going to try to take you out because there is no competition to keep that person from price gouging. That's what happens. This situation would combine with the low price of oil and right-wing tactics to sabotage any progressive measures gave rise to a crisis that, as always, hit the poorest majority the hardest. And and this is their excuses, folks. Oh, it was right-wing tactics that sabotaged any progressive measure. Those dadgum Republicans want to get rid of Obamacare. They're sabotaging health care for Americans. One payer health care, universal health care, which that Obamacare was going to lead to. They're sabotaging that. They don't realize how much it was imploding on itself, how costs were actually raising, because again, socialists have no clue of cost structure. They have no clue of market forces whatsoever. And it's not a combination of right-wing tactics to sabotage anything. It's solely on the democratic socialists, the socialism of the 21st century, not knowing how to manage markets, not knowing or not addressing the nature of some folks, the nature of some folks to be bad. And yes, it always does hit the poorest in the economies. This turn to the right, however, does not constitute a vote for conservatism. It is a protest vote against the left-wing party's inability to respond to the crisis in any way that could actually resolve it. Again, a worker out on a production floor at a manufacturer has no clue how to run that company. Now, they may set on brakes and say, look, if I was in charge, I would do this, this, and this. But if you actually sat down and thought it through, now they may have some good ideas, but you have to combine them with everything else. That person on the floor only has a limited picture of the whole company. Now, the CEO, if they're worth their salt, I don't care if they're a man or woman, if a CEO is worth their salt, they look at every aspect of the company. What determines the motivation or the modus operandi of a democratic socialist? Equality. Equality of outcomes for everybody. Everybody's got to be equal in our outcomes. Nobody gets more than anybody else. That's their motivating factor. And so to achieve that, what do? Well, they make everybody in the company, the CEO on down to the janitor, they make them equal. One of the other videos, I'm doing some research on this now, one of the other videos that's in this for socialism is about how the government of France only spends 11% of their GDP for health care. And America spends 17%. But the problem with that they don't bring out, I'll say this real quick, and this goes to what I'm saying here, is the GDP per capita in France is 44,000. In America, it's 62,000. So, in America, modern medicine in America, we innovate, we invent new medicines, new procedures, new methods, new machinery, new equipment. Not all of it, but the vast majority comes out of America. And so, yeah, we're going to spend a little bit more because we got the cutting edge stuff. And the one thing I'm going to look at is how much does France pay their doctors and nurses compared to the United States. And I know within my heart of hearts that America is going to be spending more. So, and I've talked to foreign doctors that come over here, because I go to the hospital, not frequently, but enough. And if I get a foreign doctor, I ask them, why'd you come over here? Or stay here. They came to school here and they stayed here. They became U.S. citizens. And they said, because of the money. I go back to my country, I don't make much more than anybody else. So it's not capitalism. These parties hesitant to go all the way against capitalism as a system has stalled the process and made this progressive cycle solely dependent on dictates of the market. In order for them to go all the way, the progressive, all the way, the party's hesitance to go all the way against capitalism, you're going to look like Stalinist Russia. And in another video, they talk about that. Why do you use the most extreme examples because the extreme examples ring true. In order to get your progressive paradise, your democratic socialist paradise, you have to go all the way. You have to go 100% in. You have to control it from the cradle to the grave. People, businesses, manufacturing, farming, the whole 9 yards, in order to implement all your progressive ideas. You have to go that way, because you're always going to have people that don't want to go that way. You're going to have people like me that's always going to buck the system because it doesn't deal with freedom. Socialism is anti-freedom, period. Sorry, it just is. It does not allow people to choose for themselves or to make decisions for themselves as far as where they're going to live, what they're going to eat, or what they're going to be dressed in, or what they're going to drive, or anything else. It's not going to happen. We're almost done with this. The Bolivarian process put too much faith in the idea that socialism could be brought about from above through the goodwill of leaders like Chavez. No matter how true these leaders remain to their ideas or ideals, socialism has to come from the working class consciousness role in fighting for its own emancipation. The problem is, again, you have followers and you have leaders. Leaders come out. Chavez did set up these communal councils. Maduro is still keeping with his communal councils. They're trying to empower the lower classes, but if the people do not want to lead, if the sheeple down there do not want to lead, then what are you going to do? Then what are you going to do? Second, it obscured the idea that capitalism cannot be completely reformed away. As long as wealth enters the country, projects that build popular power and helps the poor could coexist with capitalism. But as soon as capitalism comes into crisis, and this is the funny part about this whole thing here. Get this ringer off here. This is the funny thing about this whole sentence here. But as soon as capitalism comes into crisis, which it always does, why does capitalism always come into crisis? It's because we have these ne'er-do-wells out there that think socialism is a better idea, and they want to start putting these policies in place, in force, and try to change everybody, especially even those that don't want to be changed or don't want to participate in it. And that's when capitalism comes into crisis, because we got a mixed economy. We have a bunch of people that are pulling the wagon, and we have too many people sitting in the wagon, not helping to pull. And that's when capitalism comes into crisis. And the only way to fix that is get rid of the democratic socialist ideas that are causing the drag on the economy to begin with. It's not capitalism that gets into crisis. And what they're saying here, I know what Eva's talking about here. They're talking about the too big to fail financial institutions on Wall Street. That came into crisis. Folks, that was not free market capitalism. That's what we call here on the Dan Clement Show crony capitalism. And that crony capitalism is like one of the first steps into socialism. Progressive ideas. Because they're using the government to either protect themselves from market forces or to stifle competition so they don't have to compete for people's dollars. And in my opinion, and I've said this many times on the show, no company in the United States or the world is too big to fail. Sorry. That does not exist. That does not exist. And so when capitalism comes into crisis, it's not free market capitalism. It's crony capitalism. And if the companies are causing that and they're in danger of going bankrupt, let them. That's what the free market does. It weeds out the losers. It weeds out the losers. I just real quick here, one of the things they were talking about in the Phil Donahue interview of Milton Friedman, Phil Donahue said, should Kmart be allowed to buy up Sears? Now, back in '79, Sears was still the big boy on the block, but Kmart was either as big or bigger than Sears at the time, and eventually they did merge. But guess what? They're both out of business now. I don't even know if they have a web presence anymore. I know all the Kmarts and Walmart or Kmarts and Sears pulled out of the area here in central Pennsylvania. So but they can't do that. But if everything's done in a free market way, without government interference, without these socialist ne'er-do-wells out there dictating to people, free market capitalism works very well. Works really well, matter of fact. A similar dynamic was at play in European social democracy. Unless a system takes the levers of power away from the capitalists and puts it in the hands of the workers, gains will always be rolled back. The right, although divided, knows only the usual neoliberal formula: get rid of Maduro, privatize the state-owned oil companies, devalue the currency, and welcome the United States and U.S.-backed institutions like the IMF into the country. Well, that's what Argentina's doing. They're asking for a loan from the IMF so they can keep the country going, keep the government going. And they're right. It has to be. In order to save Venezuela, you got to get rid of Maduro. You got to get rid of this corrupt government structure in there. And as far as I'm concerned, folks, parliamentary systems suck. I'm sorry. Excuse my French. They stink. They don't work. They're ridiculous. Honestly, folks, parliamentary systems are one of the stupidest systems I've ever seen in my life. But again, that's the only way you're going to bring Venezuela out of the mess it's in. There's no other way to do that. You got to get rid of the socialism. You got to dig it out. You got to have people. You got to give people incentive to work. You got to allow the businesses that the people work for to either succeed or fail. You got to let them compete in the open market for goods and services and for the boulevard that the people earn while they're working. All right, that was kind of a long slideshow, and I don't really apologize for it. I think it was something very, very important that we needed to get out, that I needed to get off my chest, because these type of videos really irk me, because they make democratic socialism sound so good, and anybody that's against it, and any reasons they have or arguments they have to be against it, they're just myths. They're all just myths, and they're not. Everything I talked about here is grounded in economic fact. And history's on my side, and history's crystal clear. I don't care how benevolent you are when you institute socialism, it is always an authoritarian system. And it may not always go as far as Joe Stalin does. It may stall out like England did and stay there for a while. Cuba's using it as an example in these videos. Look at the Cuban. Yeah, look at the Cuban economy. Where was it frozen at? Like 1956. 1956. I mean, the country is backwards because of socialism. And all these pink tide countries that were coming up with Venezuela, they're in the same boat. Brazil, Uruguay, Argentina, Venezuela, they're all in the same boat. They're going down the tubes fast, and capitalism has nothing to do with it. It's the lack of capitalism is why. It's the lack of capitalism. So again, I love how these people bring these things out. Now, I do have a couple articles I want you to read. 4 Misconceptions About the Free Market by Andrew Beatty over at Investopedia. It's a good read. These are misconceptions. There's an article in there about rebuilding the Bolivarian Revolution, about Chavez and what they were trying to do. And this is one of the solutions. Oh, we got to rebuild this revolution so we can really get this thing down to grassroots to the people, so the people can take over the country and really do this democratic socialism right. Well, I feel sorry. If this happens down in Venezuela, I really feel sorry for the Venezuelan people because they're going to go through more years of misery and grief because these ne'er-do-wells think they know better how to run your life and other people's lives and other people's businesses than they do, than the people who own the business or, like, again, me. Government does not know how to run my life better than I do. Government does not know how to run businesses better than the business owners who actually are successful at doing that. The reason why they're successful, because they learn to do what they do. They know what they're doing, and they learn either through study or trial and error or both. But successful people, they learn from their failures. That's why they're successful. and successful people, as far as in a free market system, abhor democratic socialism because it's not generous. It's not generosity to take money in the form of tax dollars and be benevolent to a certain group of people without means testing or anything. That's not benevolent. And the governments are not supposed to be benevolent because, again, the government, at least in America, and that's what I'm going to talk about today, in America, we are a constitutional representative republic. The government has a constitution that's supposed to encircle it and chain it to Article 1, Section 8, to the enumerated powers. And once it gets outside of those enumerated powers, all sorts of mischief happens. That's why we're $20 trillion in debt in America. That's why social democracy has been tried in America, and they continue to keep trying to do it. And we have history on our side, folks. Conservatives, Austrian economists, free marketeers, we have history on our side. What did we do before all these socialist ne'er-do-wells stick their nose in our business? What did we do with health insurance? What did we do with retirement? What did we do with old folks? They weren't dying out in the streets. Families took care of them. Communities helped take care of them. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I think like the Mennonites and the Amish have a pretty good free market system going there. Last little story here, when I was driving a log truck for them, one of their, some have welding shops, some have cabinet shops and stuff like that. Young man was next to an acetylene tank when it blew up. Didn't kill him, but almost did. He ended up down in the burn center down at Lehigh Valley Hospital. And he was in there for quite a few months. Went through extensive skin grafts and therapy and stuff. He finally got out, and the final bill was like $1.2 million. Well, the whole Mennonite community, local community, reached out to other communities to say, hey, we had this need here. We need to pay this off. And you know what? They had it paid off within a month. They got enough people together to donate money within that community. They paid that bill off. We used to do that kind of stuff. But we don't do it anymore because people got the idea that we have a federal government. We have a government there that'll take care of us. And folks, that's how you make a weak sheeple population, is to allow the government to do everything for us. Because if the government's doing it for us, the government's taking care of our health care, taking care of our retirement, we don't have to make good decisions throughout life. We don't have to put away for our retirement and make sure we have enough to hold us through, especially with us growing older, staying alive longer. And the government's become our nanny. That makes us weak. We can't take care of ourselves. And that's just, to me, that's just a shame, folks. That's just a real shame that happens. Well, folks, we're getting to the end of the show here. And I enjoyed this show, really did. Because I like these rebuttal videos, and I like getting this information out to you folks. And I hope you folks enjoyed the show. Please subscribe to the show if you're not subscribed. Hit the notifications so you know when I put out new videos, because I'm going to put, I think there's 3 or 4 more videos along this same subject here. They'll be a lot shorter. They won't be an hour and 40 minutes long. Give me a thumbs up and thumbs down. Please comment on this. Share the video with your friends and family. Word of mouth is my best advertisement. And if you'd like to become a sponsor or just support me, I have a Patreon account, and I also have a PayPal account you can go over to. This has been the Dan Columbus Show. I'm your host, Dan Columbus, your constitutional warrior. Remember,